All right, I'm going to talk about hemlocks. The scientific name for hemlock genus is Tsuga. It's a silent T, so it's T-S-U-G-A, Tsuga. They're usually kind of climax species, trees that are in the forest canopy after long periods without disturbance. They're shade tolerant, competition tolerant, and dense. They produce a lot of their own shade. Here you can see these branches, they have needle-like leaves. They're linear, usually, and have a spiral arrangement around the twig. And they have lots of fine little twigs, and so you get this really dense, fine textured branch that casts a dark, dark shade, which makes it hard for other plants to live under them, but makes good cover for a lot of animals. So one way to recognize them is those short needles and just dense. Can't see through the branch, just lots and lots of needles and fine little branches. They also have a distinctive, again, I don't know if you can zoom up enough to see this, but they have a rounded leaf scar. So the needles, the individual needles have a petiole, so they're petiolate. And then right where it attaches to the twig, there's sort of a rounded bump on the twig, and sometimes it's a slightly different color than the surrounding woody tissue, sometimes not. It's hard to see. It's not as distinctive as, say, the spruce
I think I can maybe
or Douglas
see
fir, but it's there.
a little bit. Yeah, I can see it a little bit.
But of all the members of the pine family, which Tsuga is part of the pine family, it's got the smallest, the shortest needles, and they tend to be blunt, and they have a petiole, so those are all things to look for. The cones are small too. They have papery scales in a spiral arrangement, and we'll look at those in a second. There's two main species in Oregon. The most common is the western hemlock, Tsuga heterophylla, and that's what I've got here. The needles here, they're less than ½ an inch in length, but they're also variable in length. And if you come up close, some needles stick out to the side here, and others are kind of folded over the top. And that's what you can see, these little white lines along the top are actually really short needles, 1/8 of an inch or something. And they're folded over the top of the twig. Heterophylla means variably leaved, and it's referring to those different leaf lengths. But you can see that they're kind of a dull green above, green. And then on the underside has very pronounced white stomatal bloom. And dense, really dense. The cones are also really small. So you can see that they're only about, ½ an inch or less. Papery scales, the edges are rounded and smooth. And they're adorable. You see it, probably the most adorable cone you're going to see in the pine family. Okay, so nice and small, and they hang downward, they're pendant. The bark is gray and shallowly furrowed. They grow fairly slowly because they're shade tolerant. They don't put a lot of energy into fast growth. They just wait it out and take their time and gradually replace those more shade intolerant trees that might be above them. They can't grow throughout the kind of temperate region here. They're common in the Coast Range and also at low to mid elevations of the Cascades. You don't find as much western hemlock as you go to the interior Northwest, but you can find it in the northern Rockies where it gets enough moisture. Likes a fair bit of moisture, really part of this more temperate rainforest. Usually mixed with other trees like Douglas fir. You often find it in the understory. Another characteristic for not only western hemlock, but mountain hemlock as well, but it's more pronounced in the western hemlock, is that the apex is droopy. So sometimes you can see that from a distance. Most of the conifers, like a Douglas fir, will have a very erect leader, but on the hemlocks it sort of hangs downward. Okay, so dense, fine texture, short needles, droopy leader, those are all good signs for hemlock. Western hemlock is a valuable tree. It used to be considered a junk tree, but not anymore. It's good for finish work, trim, but also pulp. So it is a valuable tree, but because it's a fairly small tree when you compare it to Douglas fir and slow growing, it's not quite as valuable as Douglas fir. So that's a western hemlock. And on the other side here, we have mountain hemlock. which really doesn't look anything like western hemlock, but the needles are short. It still has the rounded leaf scar. The needles do have a petiole, so all those characteristics are similar. It should tell you that it is a hemlock. But here, the needles, you can see they have a bluish-green color cast because both the top and the bottom are glaucous. So you don't have the pronounced bloom on the underside. Instead, what you have is a layer of wax all over the needle. And they also don't fold over the top. Instead, they sort of stick out like a bottle brush on all sides of the twig. And so when you look at the ends of the branch, it looks like little blue stars. You can see that. So it's sort of like a little starburst, little blue starburst. It gets its name mountain hemlock because it is a subalpine tree species, and when you grow in an area with lots of high winds and snows and rains, wax gets rubbed off, and so sometimes you'll see mountain hemlock and it'll look more yellow-green than blue-green, and but that said, if it's at a high elevation, it's probably a mountain hemlock, especially if the needles stick out on all sides. But you'll notice too just how dense this is. This is a smaller tree, so the western hemlock will get over 150 feet tall if you give it enough time, but this one's usually 100 or less. Shorter, often a dark brown bark, and frequently pistil budded at the bottom. What that means is right where the trunk comes into the soil, it often has a J-shaped hook, especially on slopes. And that's from that creeping snow that kind of pushed down that young tree, and then it snapped back in the spring and then got pushed over again. And then eventually you get these funny J-shaped forests, trunks. They cast a dense shade. They tend to be in pure stands and with almost no understory under them. And they're common in like ski areas. If you go up there or hiking in the high country, you'll find mountain hemlock. The cones, they're a little bigger, about twice as big or more than the, so here's the western hemlock. I'll put that next to this cone here. Unfortunately, so many, they're only about, I don't know, 1.5 inches, 2 inches long, rounded scales. They have their beautiful purple color before they turn brown or tan in color. Really showy, hang downward. But once they get plucked and they dry out down here in the valley, the scales reflex completely backwards, so it makes it hard to show it to you. But they start out looking more like that. And both western hemlocks and mountain hemlocks frequently just produce a ton of cones, so they're pretty easy to spot on the tree. There's usually a lot of them. Okay.
That's it?
That's it.